Graeme Roustan is the chairman and CEO of Roustan Capital. In 2008, he led the acquisition of Bauer Hockey from Nike. And as its chairman, he oversaw the additional acquisitions of Mission iTech, Cascade Lacrosse, Maverick Lacrosse, and Combat. Graeme's probably most well known for his pursuit of a second NHL team for Toronto and his role as governor of the Canadiens Women's Hockey League. In 2015, he held almost 2% of Performance Sports Group's common stock when he discovered a dramatic change in the company's strategy. He launched a campaign which, in part, called on the board to replace the CEO, which was successfully accomplished in March of 2016. Graeme recently announced the acquisition of shares in Power Corporation and is calling for the sale of non-core divisions to increase shareholder value, and I know he's going to talk a little bit about that today. Interviewing Graeme is Danielle Fernandez, president of Banter Media, a digital marketing agency based here in Toronto. And Danielle and her team provide digital marketing and creative solutions for clients during all stages of business development. So I will now turn it over to Danielle and Graeme.
Thanks, Eric. Graeme, thanks for joining us today. It's been about a year since you last spoke at this very conference. We're looking forward to getting some updates from you today.
That's good. I've got some.
We know. This time last year, you were in the middle of your campaign against Performance Sports Group. I think most of us in the room are fairly aware of what happened there. The company filed for bankruptcy and the directors are gone. Wondering if you can give us an update from your end on what transpired.
Okay, for those of you who don't know the story, but Performance Sports Group, we took it public in March 10th, 2011, here on the TSX. It was later co-listed on the New York Stock Exchange. I left the board in 2012, but became its largest shareholder, individual shareholder, as opposed to institutional shareholder. And I didn't sell any, I kept the shares because I believed in the company. And in January of 2015, the company came out and announced a change in its strategy. After 88 years of selling direct to retailers like Canadian Tire, Forzani, and all the others, they decided to go direct to consumer and basically compete against its own customers. So I quietly, behind the scenes, went to the board and said, what are you doing? And I had an ongoing conversation with them starting in January of 2015 all the way till September of 2015. And I hired Grant Thornton to do a survey of the retailers, because I went to the board and I said, before you make a move like this, you should really talk to your customers, find out what they think. And they didn't agree with me. It makes no sense. You should always ask your customers how they feel. No matter what business you're in, you should have an idea of how they feel. So they decided not to. So I hired Grant Thornton to do the survey. The survey was completed, and I had a meeting set up with the board of Power Performance Sports Group on June 5th, 2015. And I was told on May 28th from Grant Thornton that I was not going to be getting the results of my survey because they'd been threatened. That if they gave me the results of the survey, they were going to be sued. So I went into the meeting without the survey results and the report from Grant Thornton, trying to make my case. Obviously was unsuccessful. The company continued on with their retail strategy, and one thing led to another. I came out against them and their strategy, and in October of 2016, since I last was here, they declared bankruptcy. The whole thing blew up, and all of 9 directors now are playing golf somewhere. The CEO and CFO are facing a class action lawsuit. It is a complete disaster. And Grant Thornton was correct about getting sued, but they were thinking they were going to get sued by Performance Sports Group, but in fact it was me who sued them. So I'm currently suing them here in the Ontario Superior Court, and that's going to become very public in the next few weeks. So stay tuned, it'll be in the media. But that company was, I got to tell you, it's one of the greatest companies you'd ever want to be involved in. Bauer, Easton, Cascade, all the names that everybody here knows. And they decided that in order to look better on the balance sheet than they perhaps were, they were channel stuffing. That's apparently what they were doing, and that's going to be found out in this current class action lawsuit. There's I understand that there's an Ontario Securities Commission investigation and also an SEC investigation on the company. So I also hear that the executives that are currently facing a lot of issues are blaming me for 100% for the downfall of the company. They're blaming me, that I was the one who was asking too many questions and came out against them. And so here they are, subject to class action lawsuits, investigations by the SEC and the OSC, and apparently they're upset at me for asking questions. And so that's how everything started here in my efforts to ask questions. When you're a shareholder, the only thing you've got at your disposal is the ability to ask a question. I mean, that's all you got. You don't have a gun, you don't have a baseball bat, you don't have anything other than to ask questions. You're a shareholder, you ask questions. And it's all about how companies engage with you. And that's the topic here today, about shareholder engagement. And I will sort of share with you a couple more experiences that I've had in the past year to give you an idea of how these companies respond to questions when they're asked by a shareholder.
And now you are pursuing 2 public campaigns, and I mean, PSG put you on the map as a serious activist investor. We're aware of that for sure. You've taken a meaningful position in AstraZeneca, the Quebec-based biopharmaceutical drug development company, and Power Corporation, the diversified international management holding company. They have interests in financial services, renewable energy, communications, and other business sectors. So I'd love to talk about AstraZeneca first. You're putting pressure on the board. You've called on them to put the company up for sale. Can you give us an update?
So those are two public campaigns that are ongoing because I felt I had to go public to increase the pressure on these companies. But there have been other companies that I've been working with, not public, very behind the scenes, because there are companies out there that once you sit down and talk, they do want to talk. They're learning. There are companies out there that have figured it out that, maybe it's best to sit down with this guy and have a conversation. And so whoever's advising them to sit down and have a conversation, I think you're doing a good job, because that's really what they should be doing, as opposed to having this knee-jerk reaction of, we know better than you, get the heck out of here. So the 2 that are public are AstraZeneca, which is a pharmaceutical company, like Danielle said, it's originally from Quebec City, actually. It's moved its headquarters down to South Carolina. And I asked them why. I'm just curious, why did you move? Whenever a company moves its headquarters, you think there's a very strategic reason for doing it, and it makes a lot of sense and all that sort of stuff. And when I asked the question, the response was, well, our new CEO lives in South Carolina. I said, so you're moving the headquarters to South Carolina because this, and by the way, that CEO has been fired since. So, they're now down in South Carolina. I approached the board and I said, look, you've got several different drugs in the FDA system for approval. You're burning through cash. You've got all these expenses. You've got to start cutting costs and expenses. They started doing that, and then I said to them that you've got 1 drug left in the pipeline, just 1. So the FDA controls the future of this company, because if the Food and Drug Administration approves the drug, then the company and the stock will be great. But if they don't approve it, it's toast. So this is the time to find out if there's any value in your company. So put yourself up for sale and start talking to other pharmaceutical companies, because the only buyer of this company, as far as I can see, is another pharmaceutical company that sees some value in that drug that they're putting through the FDA process. And to me, that's sort of a test to see if there's any real value in this company, because if another pharmaceutical company looks at this drug and they want to buy the company, then to me, that's a good sign that there's some value in this company, that others who are smart in this area. So I asked them to form a special committee. They did, and so we'll see what happens. But they did fire the CEO, and the CEO is now, they're suing the CEO, and the CEO is suing them, and it is a colossal, colossal mess. And yes, I'm the largest shareholder in that company. On to Power. The public campaign on Power, it became public this past week or 2. You know, when I was doing the Performance Sports Group activist campaign, if that's what we're going to call it, I knew of Power Corporation. I grew up in Montreal. So if you grow up in Montreal, you know Power. And if you grow up in Canada, you certainly know Power. But what's kind of unique about Power Corporation is that my father was an attorney, and he had a law firm in Montreal called Graeme Roustan and She. And his address, when I was a kid growing up for, 15 years, his law firm was at 751 Square Victoria, Suite 600, sixth floor, the whole sixth floor. And when I was doing the research on Bauer and Sagard Capital and all that sort of stuff, and I was doing my white paper for Performance Sports Group, I noticed that the address for Power Corporation is 751 Square Victoria, Suite 600. So they're in my dad's old office. So I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. So I wanted to look a little bit deeper into the company and find out more about it. And when I looked at the company, it's this sprawling conglomerate. They're in wind farm energy. They own La Presse newspapers. They just got all these different assets. They're a hedge fund in Europe. They own or control a 50% stake in Parsega, which is a company that holds stock in Adidas and other different companies. So that's just sort of like a holding company. They're in insurance, as everybody knows. They're just like a shotgun approach to. I don't see a strategy. I see zero strategy, very little synergies whatsoever. So what I decided to do is I reach out to them and say, look, I see an opportunity for you to unlock value here. Their stock is down 16% over the last 10 years, without including inflation. Without adjusting for inflation, they're down 16% over 10 years. You know, and if you compare that to General Electric, GE, over the last 10 years, they're only down 2%. And GE is a mess. Everybody agrees General Electric is a mess. So if GE is a mess and they're down 2%, what does it say about Power? So I see an opportunity for them to unlock a lot of value here by selling off these divisions. And I ran the numbers and I said, look, sell off some of these divisions and take the proceeds and either reinvest in your core market, which is insurance and financial services, or offer a special dividend to shareholders, or buy back some of your own stock, or a combination of the three. But don't do nothing. Do something.
What's the response been?
Well, I think that their response in a very polite way is to say to me, pound sand. You know, we know what we're doing. We know what we're doing. We've got a plan. And that's very typical in big companies that are controlled by controlling shareholders, that they have a plan and they know what they're doing. And this is the way we've done it for the last 30 years, and so we're going to continue doing it this way. And what's common with Power and a lot of other big companies that are controlled like this, they hate, more than anything else, any media attention. They hate any kind of flashlight pointed on them. And that's what upsets them more than anything. So in the Power thing, like they control the board, so there's not going to be a proxy fight, and we're going to put a slate forward, and that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that I'm going to continue to put pressure on the company to make changes. And any change, I believe, any change that they make about selling off these divisions, non-core assets, is going to improve the stock price and create shareholder value, and therefore shareholders will benefit, including the Desmarais family. I mean, I believe that if they do what I say to do over the next bunch of years, their stock will double in value over the next 10 years. So the Desmarais family will become even richer than they are now. So I'm not criticizing anything other than they need to refine their strategy and focus on selling off these divisions. And I believe once they sell off these divisions, the company will be worth a lot more than it is today.
Have any of your fellow shareholders contacted you about this?
I got a lot of when I did the Bauer deal, I got a lot of shareholders reaching out to me because it's Bauer, and they're very passionate about Bauer because Bauer's hockey and their kids play hockey. And a lot of people bought Bauer stock or Performance Sports Group stock because they played hockey and they had Bauer, and it was the Bauer connection. The contacts I've gotten from the Power shareholders are more of the serious institutional investors that are sort of really struggling holding this stock that's not performing. Yeah, it does produce a dividend, no question, but you need more than just a dividend. You need to have the value of that underlying stock has to improve. Otherwise, it's just there's a better place to put your money.
Yeah, and we've been hearing more and more of that institutional investors are contacting activists prior to them waging a campaign. So sort of requests for activism. Thoughts on that?
Again, I'm surprised. Now I've only been doing this for 2 years really, and I'm actually quite surprised how when I reached out to a couple of institutional investors of PSG stock, they took the calls because they wanted to talk about, their own story about Bauer or something like that. But their opinion was, well, we vote along ISS and Glass Lewis, and that's how we vote, and we don't really think outside that box. But just in the last year or two, it's changed. I mean, institutional investors, shareholders are sort of looking for, and I'm just generalizing, but to have a guy like me go out there and stand up and grab the microphone and get in the media and sort of tell a story that they support, they kind of like to be behind a guy like me that will be willing to go out there and get beat up in the media.
If you had a crystal ball, what would you predict the outcome of the Power Corporation campaign is going to be?
Well, I think that at the next AGM, there'll be a higher percentage of withheld votes for some of the directors. I think that'll send a signal. I also think between now and May of 2018, I think my guess is that Power will probably sell off a division, maybe two. There'll be some movement. That's what I'm hoping. What's the crystal ball say? It's hard to say. They may not want to do anything just to, if they do something now, let's say next week they announce they're going to sell off 3 divisions, I think that'll make me look like some sort of like genius, which I don't think that's in their what they want to do. So I don't know if they're going to want to make me look right, but I'm going to keep the pressure on, and we'll see what happens in the next AGM. I have plenty of time. It's May of 2018, so I think I have enough time to keep putting the pressure on, talking to additional institutional investors, and my goal is to keep pushing on all of their sensitive areas, which is, of course, media and shareholders.
You alluded earlier that there are a couple of other campaigns you're working on. Are any of them public, or do you have any other targets in mind right now?
Well, as a matter of fact, yesterday I was here and I met with a representative of a board. I've asked for a chairman to step down, and yesterday we sat down and we negotiated a deal, and they've agreed, the board has agreed, and so is the chairman, to step down. And so, there's a lot of that kind of a conversation that go on. It's not public. As far as public campaigns, there's 2 other TSX companies that I've identified as there's a obvious, to me, opportunity to unlock a lot of shareholder value. So I always start privately and quietly. I always go and approach the chairman directly in a very positive way, ask for lunch, ask for a conversation. That's the way I always do it. I did it with Performance Sports Group. I went to the chairman on November 10th, 2014, and had a conversation with him. And the only reason that Performance Sports Group went public in September of 2015 was because he wrote a letter to the shareholders. He wrote a letter when I put my name up for there was a board seat that was going empty, and I put my name in the hat. He wrote a letter to shareholders saying that I wasn't qualified to be on the board, which was bizarre because I was the former chairman of the board, largest shareholder of the board, and there's not too many people that question my industry connection to the hockey world, but he claimed I wasn't qualified to be on the board. That's when it went public. So I usually, I always go and speak directly with the chair first. And because I was on the issuer side, because I was the chairman of a publicly traded company, a current chairman of a publicly traded company will usually, more times than not, have lunch with me because I've been on the issuer side. I've been on that side of the table. So there's a certain amount of, I don't want to say old school network or something, but there's a certain accommodation that chairmen and chairs make to former chairs and current chairs. So I will get that lunch, I'll get that coffee, I'll get that meeting. And most times, like yesterday, it worked out in a very good resolution for everybody.
Are they all Canadian-based? Anybody that you've got your eye on?
So far, everything really, public is all Canadian-based. Anturnas and Terras, Power, Performance Sports Group, that's all, the public ones are all Canadian-based. The one yesterday was Canadian-based. So, yeah, I think I tend to focus on Canadian companies. You know, the U.S. market is so crowded with shareholder activism and shareholders chasing companies. I'm very well known here in Toronto, I think. I think pursuing a second NHL team for Toronto gave me an incredible platform and a stage, by the way, which I'm still looking at getting that deal done. And if there's anybody here from MLSE, sorry. But I'm still pursuing that, so that gave me a bit of a platform. And of course, when you're the chairman of Bauer in Canada, I mean, you know, that gets you a lot of media.
Hockey is our identity.
It is. It really is. So.
I guess that wraps up my component. We can take some questions from the audience. Eric, if anybody has any. I know a lot of people already asked you questions earlier, but just in case anybody has some questions.
Yeah, a lot of Q&A took place in the lobby out there. And,
Hi, nice to see you back again this year. There's a cost to being an activist investor, not just in terms of reputation and sleepless nights, and we're all more gray than we used to be. There's a real upfront, out-of-pocket cost. How do you budget for the cost of the war, and when is too much too much?
Yeah, so far, everything I've done so far is out of my own pocket. I haven't taken on any partners in any of these campaigns or anything that I'm doing. I am spending a lot of time right now with a few people here in Toronto about creating a fund specifically for going into the Canadian activist fund business to be able to take on bigger pieces. I'll give you an example. In Anturnas and Terras, you know, I got into that at I was buying stock at between 74 cents a share and 82 cents a share, and it spiked to $2.50 a share, and it's in the low twos or something. So, you know, I've already made, you know, it's almost like if you come out with a campaign, or if you come out and you say that you're trying to create shareholder value, the stock tends to go up a little bit. In that case, it went up a lot. I don't know really why, but it did. So, but to answer your question, right now I'm doing everything out of my own pocket, and I kind of like it that way right now. It's there's been a lot of invitations to join forces and stuff, which to me is a compliment. I always take that as a compliment. Anytime you're invited for dinner or to a party, or whenever you're invited to anything, it's a compliment. It means that people want you around. So, but what I've noticed that there's a huge opportunity coming up, because I don't know if you were all watching Nelson Peltz last week or 2 weeks ago at the P&G headquarters, and he was being interviewed by CNBC, and you know, he was basically saying that no company is safe. You know, there was a time when, you know, if you were a big company, you didn't have to worry about it, but there really is no company anymore that can just sort of say, oh well, we don't have to worry about shareholders getting together and coming after us. So those days are gone. Having said that, there's a lot of companies out there that are not performing optimally. And I think that the advantage that I have a lot of times is that having been on the issuer side and having overseen the operation of a publicly traded company, I understand the inner workings of them. I understand the politics. I understand the group think at a board. You know, that's the thing, and I know all of you know what I'm talking about. You look at a board sometimes, and you just look at all these faces, and they're sitting there, and there's one person, usually the chair, who's sort of dictating, you know, what's going to happen, and you got 7 or 8 other board directors that are just nodding. They're sort of like half asleep, and they're just nodding. And what they're thinking about is their director fee. They're thinking about their stock options. They're thinking about where the annual, you know, meeting is. We're going to go to the Bahamas this year and talk about business. What am I going to wear? Who am I going to bring? It becomes a little tiny like social club. And I'm seeing that a lot. And the way I look at it is this. If you're on a board, on any board, whether publicly traded or a private company or not-for-profit, you're there to do a job. That's a job. You're getting paid, and the shareholders are paying you. And you're there to vote and make decisions in the best interest of the company in Canada. And when I go and I see some boards and I sit there and I look at these people and they're half asleep, they're not doing their job, and they gotta go. And just because they've got a fancy name or a fancy title or an education with a lot of letters at the end of their name, that doesn't mean they're doing their job or that they're actually a good director. So I started out on the issuer side, being the chairman of a publicly traded company. And now I'm on the shareholder side saying, you know what? These companies belong to the shareholders. They don't belong to the directors. In many cases, and one of my issues with Performance Sports Group was that the directors, 7 out of the 8 directors had no shares. They had no shares. They didn't own a single share. It was mind-blowing. Attorneys and Terrace. Add up all the shares that all the directors have. Okay, there was like 7 directors. 7 directors, all together, had 4,000 shares. Now, keep in mind, the price of the stock was like 80 cents a share. And these are people drawing $150,000. The share is $150,000. The other directors are making $100,000 a year. And they have no shares. They have no skin in the game whatsoever. So to me, from the shareholder point of view, I'm an activist shareholder, I guess, because it's my money. And you're working for me. And if you're showing up at board meetings and you're asleep, guess what? I'm coming after you. And maybe that's a little aggressive, but I just think that the shareholders own the company. Is that amazing to think that way? It's kind of crazy, when you think about the shareholders own the company.
There have been some quiet conversations about reducing director pay or making director pay exclusively in stock or restricted stock in order to eliminate the career directors, which are kind of the people that you're talking about, as well as cutting back more significantly on the allowable number of director positions. What do you think of those kinds of proposals?
I think you're absolutely right. I think that 50% of your compensation should be in the form of stock or some sort of a stock option or something. 50% of your compensation should be in that form. I'm also a big believer, I don't know if many of you know me, but I'm a huge believer in the change of the dynamics of the board room. We need more diversity on the boards. We need more women on the boards. We need more women as chairs of the board, chair and chairs of the committee. That's what we need. We need more women at the board level. We need more pay compensation tied to the performance of the stock in the company. And I believe we need term limits. I think that every company industry is a little different, but when you see somebody that's on a board for 10 years or 8 years or something like that, Attorneys and Terrace, another example, they got 2 guys on the board 14 years or something, like 13 and 14 years. 13 or 14 years, what is that person bringing fresh to the table after year 6, or 5? What fresh input or insights does that person have after year, 3, 4, 5, 6? 14, you're kidding me. So I believe in term limits. I believe in compensation that's tied to the performance of the stock. And I believe that there should be more women, not only on the board. And I don't like that everyone's talking about, well, we need to have more women on the board. I don't want to get to a point, I don't want it to see where we're saying, okay, well, we've got 2 people on our board, so 2 women on our board, so we're good. That's not what I want women in leadership positions on the board.
In a public company where it is family controlled like Power Corp, is your approach different, number one, and are your goals also different? Presumably so, but can you expand on that, please?
That's a great question. I think that's probably the question that most I've gotten in the last week, because a family-controlled board is a different animal. You're not going to have a proxy fight and win. They're not going to vote for you. So you know that. So your approach has to be different. Your approach has to be, what are your goals? And the goal for Power Corporation, first and foremost, I mean, if you look at their board, they've got some pretty impressive people in there. I don't know if any of you know Isabelle Marcoux, but Isabelle Marcoux is like one of the smartest people. I'm not saying one of the smartest women. I'm saying one of the smartest people I've ever met in my entire life. This woman is brilliant, okay? So they've got some very smart people on the board. I'm not looking to replace necessarily anybody on the board. I've offered to serve on the board. I've volunteered to serve on the board. I've offered the company that I'll serve on your board. Whatever director fee that must be paid to a director, I'll donate to a charity. Any charity, in Quebec or Ontario, I'll donate it. I'm not looking for the director fee. I'll work for free. So I'm demonstrating that I got skin in the game and that I'm a shareholder, and I'm not just all talk. I'm willing to work to help in any way I can. So my effort with Power Corporation is to encourage the family and encourage the directors to take a new direction, to look at things differently, to bring some fresh ideas and faces to the board. So to your point, a very good point, when it's a family-controlled company, you cannot go in there with your elbows up. That's a hockey thing, You can't go into the corners with your elbows up. You have to go in and say, with tremendous respect. I don't know if you saw my letter to them, but some in the media reported that my letter was a typical Canadian polite letter, from an activist. A Canadian activist writes polite letters. And my letter was extremely polite and extremely respectful. And what I'm coming to that board with is ideas, not threats. And so that's my approach. Now, they have two choices. One, ignore me. Two, listen to me. If they listen to me, there's all sorts of upside, I believe. If they ignore me, well, I'm not going away. So right now, I want to be a positive contributor to Power Corporation and the family. I have a lot of respect for the family. I have a lot of respect for the company and the board members, and I've been very clear about that. So it's a very Canadian approach.
All right, thank you very much, Graeme. That was great, as usual. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. See you next year.